What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Lollipops to Die For. I'm your host, Stephanie, and this is
Simona.
And today we are going to be talking about the Muswell Hill murder. You don't want to miss this one.
So today we'll talk about this serial killer, pretty famous in Britain, not so famous here, but upon us talking before, realizing that most likely he's the precursor to Jeffrey Dahmer. So we'll look at the life of British serial killer Dennis Nilsen, who lived from 1945 and died in 2018. He's responsible for the murders of at least 12 young men in the north of London in the early 80s. He got caught when his attempts to dispose of some of the remains of his victims led to drain blockages at his flat. When confronted on the crimes, he confessed in a completely calm manner. The fact that it was pretty normal, like he offered no resistance and he acted in no irresponsible way. So all of Nilsen's murders were committed at the two North London addresses where he lived between 1978 to 1983. His victims would be lured to these addresses through deception and killed by strangulation, sometimes accompanied by drowning. Following each murder, Nilsen would perform a ritual in which he bathed and dressed the victim's body, which he retained for extended periods of time. So he would kill them and lay them down before dissecting and disposing of the remains by burning them in bonfire or flushing them down the toilet. Nilsen became known as the Muswell Hill murderer as he committed his later murders in the Muswell Hill district of North London. He died at the York Hospital on May 12, 2018 of a pulmonary embolism and a retroperitoneal hemorrhage, which occurred following surgery to repair an abdominal aortic aneurysm.
So
sucks to be him.
It does. So let's get into a little bit about this douchebag. So in November 1975, Nilsen encountered a 20-year-old man named David Gilligan being threatened outside a pub by two other men. Nilsen intervened in the altercation and took Gilligan to his room at 80 Tenmouth Road in Cricklewood district of North London. The two men spent the evening drinking and talking. Nilsen learned that Gilligan had recently moved to London from Weston Supermar, Somerset, was gay, unemployed, and residing in a hostel. The following morning, both men agreed to live together in a larger residence, and Nilsen, using part of the inheritance given to him by his father, immediately resolved to find a larger property. Several days later, the pair viewed a vacant ground floor flat at 195 Melrose Avenue, also in Cricklewood, and they decided to move into the property together. Prior to moving into Melrose Avenue, Nilsen negotiated a deal with the landlord whereby he and Gilligan had exclusive use of the garden at the rear of the property. Initially, Nilsen experienced domestic contentment with Gilligan, but within a year of their moving to the Melrose Avenue, the superficial relationship between the two men began to show signs of strain. They slept in separate beds and both began to bring home casual sexual partners. Gilligan later insisted Nilsen had never been physically violent towards him, but that he did engage in verbal abuse, and the pair had been arguing with increasing frequency by early 1976. Nilsen later stated that following a heated argument in May 1977, he demanded Gilligan leave the residence. Gilligan later informed investigators that he had chosen to end the relationship. So Nilsen formed a brief relationships with several other young men over the following 18 months. None of these relationships lasted more than a few weeks, and none of the men expressed any intention of living with him on a permanent basis. And by late 1978, he was living a solitary existence. He had experienced at least 3 failed relationships in the previous 18 months, and he later confessed to having developed an increasing conviction that he was unfit to live with. Throughout 1978, he devoted an ever-increasing amount of time, effort, and assiduity to his work, and most evenings he spent consuming spirits and or lager as he listened to music.
So, first of all, he had a blissful relationship, and that was it. Well, on October, here's where it starts, actually. On October 11, 1979, Nilsen attempted to murder a student from Hong Kong named Andrew Ho, whom he had met in a St. Martin Lane pub and lured to his flat on the promise of sex. Nilsen attempted to strangle Ho, who managed to flee from his flat and reported the incident to the police. Nilsen was questioned in relation to the incident, but Ho decided not to press charges. 2 months after the attempted murder of Ho, on December 3rd, 1979, Nilsen encountered a 23-year-old Canadian student named Kenneth Ockenden, who had been on tour of England visiting relatives. Nilsen encountered Ockenden as they both drank at the West End pub, and upon learning the young man was a tourist, Nilsen offered to show him several London landmarks. Of course, they drank, then they stopped on an off-license en route and insisting to share the bill. Nilsen was adamant he could not recall the precise moment he strangled the student, but recalled that he used the cord of his headphones that the student was listening music with. So he also recalled dragging the student across his floor with the wire wrapped around his neck as he strangled him, before pouring himself half a glass of rum and continuing to listen to music on the headphones which the student had provided. The following day, Nilsen purchased a Polaroid camera, as a matter of fact, and photographed the body in various suggestive positions. He then laid the student's corpse spread eagle above him on his bed as he watched television for several hours before wrapping the body in plastic bags and stowing the corpse beneath the floorboards. On approximately 4 occasions over the following fortnight, Nilsen took the body from beneath the floorboards and seated the body upon his armchair alongside him as he himself watched television and drank alcohol, because we just watch TV with dead corpses.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's just what you do.
Right.
So Nilsen killed his third victim, a 16-year-old Martin Duffy, on May 17, 1980. Duffy was a catering student from Birkenhead, Myerside, who had hitchhiked to London without his parents' knowledge on May 13th, after being questioned by British Transport Police for evading his train fare. For 4 days, Duffy had slept rough near Euston railway station before Nilsen encountered the youth as he returned from a union conference in Southport. Duffy, Nilsen recollected, was both exhausted and hungry, and happily accepted Nilsen's offer of a meal and a bed for the evening. After the youth had fallen asleep in Nilsen's bed, Nilsen fashioned a ligature around his neck, then simultaneously sat on Duffy's chest and tightened the ligature with a great force. Nilsen held the grip until Duffy became unconscious. He then dragged the youth into the kitchen and drowned him in the sink before bathing with his body, which he recollected as being the youngest looking I had ever seen. Duffy's body was first placed upon a kitchen chair and then upon the bed on which he had been strangled. The body was repeatedly kissed, complimented, and caressed by Nilsen, both before and after he had masturbated while sitting upon the stomach of the corpse. For 2 days, Duffy's body was stowed in the cupboard before Nilsen noted signs of bloating. Therefore, he went straight under the floorboards. Following Duffy's murder, Nilsen began to kill with increasing frequency. Before the end of 1980, he killed a further 5 victims and attempted to murder another one. Only one of these victims, who Nilsen murdered, a 26-year-old William Sutherland, had ever been identified. Nilsen's recollections of the unidentified victims were vague, but he graphically recalled how each victim had been murdered and just how long the body had been retained before dissection. One unidentified victim killed in November had moved his legs in a circling motion as he was strangled. Nilsen is known to have absented himself from the work between November 11th to the 18th, likely due to this particular murder. Another unidentified victim, Nilsen had unsuccessfully attempted to resuscitate before sinking to his knees and sobbing, then spitting at his own image as he looked at himself in the mirror. On another occasion, he had lain in the bed alongside the body of an unidentified victim as he listened to the classical theme, Fanfare for the Common Man, before bursting into tears.
Wow. Inevitably, the accumulated bodies beneath Nilsen's floorboards attracted insects and created a foul odor, particularly throughout summer months. On occasion, when Nilsen disentered the dissected victim from beneath the floorboards, he noted that the bodies were covered with infested maggots and all sorts of larvae. So some victims' heads had maggots crawling out of their eye socket and mouths. He placed deodorants beneath the floorboards and sprayed insecticides about twice daily, but the odor of decay and the presence of flies remained. In late 1980s, Nilsen removed the dissected bodies of each victim killed since December 1979 and burned them upon a communal bonfire he had constructed on waste ground behind his flat. To disguise the smell of the burning flesh of the 6 dissected bodies placed upon the pyre, Nilsen crowned the bonfire with an old car tire. 3 neighborhood children stood to watch this particular bonfire, and Nilsen later wrote in his memoir that he felt it would have seemed in order if he had seen these 3 children dancing around a mass funeral pyre. When the bonfire had been reduced to ashes and cinders, Nilsen used a rake to search the debris for any recognizable bones. Noting a skull was still intact, he smashed it to pieces with his rake. Pretty normal to say the least.
On or about January 4th, 1981, Nilsen encountered an unidentified man whom he described to investigators as an 18-year-old blue-eyed young Scot at the Golden Lion pub in Soho. He was lured to Melrose Avenue upon the promise of partaking in a drinking contest. After Nilsen and this victim had consumed several beverages, Nilsen strangled him with a tie and subsequently placed the body beneath the floorboards. Nilsen is known to have informed his employers he was ill and unable to attend work on January 12th in order that he could dissect both the victim and another unidentified victim he had killed approximately 1 month earlier. By April, Nilsen had killed 2 further unidentified victims, one of whom he described as an English skinhead whom he had met in Leicester Square. The other he described as Belfast Boy, a man in his early 20s, approximately 5'9" in height, whom he had murdered sometime in February. In relation to the first of these 3 unidentified victims, he later casually reflected, "End of the day, end of the drink, end of a person. Floorboards back, carpet replaced, and back to work at Denmark Street." The following month, Nilsen removed the internal organs of several victims stowed beneath the floorboards. He discarded these innards upon the waste ground behind his flat and in his household rubbish.
Because that's what normal people do. The final victim to be murdered at Melrose Avenue was a 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow, whom Nilsen discovered slumped against the wall outside his home on September 17, 1981. When Nilsen inquired as to Barlow's welfare, he was informed the medication Barlow was prescribed for his epilepsy had caused his legs to weaken. Nilsen suggested that Barlow should be in the hospital and supported him and walked him into his residence before phoning for an ambulance. The following day, Barlow was released from hospital and returned to Nilsen's homes, apparently to thank him. He was invited in, and after eating a meal, began drinking rum and coke, and before falling asleep on the sofa. Nilsen decided to manually strangle Barlow as he slept, before stowing his body beneath his kitchen sink the following morning. This man has a thing with the floorboards and kitchens. In the May 1981, Nilsen's landlord decided to renovate 195 Melrose Avenue and asked Nilsen to vacate the property. Nilsen was initially resistant to the proposal, but accepted the offer of £1,000 from the landlord to vacate the residence. He moved into an attic flat at 23rd D Cranley Gardens in the Muswell Hill district of North London on October 5th, 1981. The day before he vacated the property, Nilsen burned the dissected bodies of the last 5 victims he had killed at this address upon a third and final bonfire he constructed in the garden behind the flat. Again, Nilsen ensured the bonfire was crowned with an old hard tire to disguise the smell and burning flesh. Nilsen had already dissected the bodies of 4 of these victims in January and August, and needed only to complete the dissection of Barlow for the 3rd bonfire. Because, we're eating steak.
You're right. At 23 Cranley Gardens, Nilsen had no access to a garden, and as he resided in an attic flat, he was unable to stow any bodies beneath his floorboards. For almost 2 months, any acquaintances Nilsen encountered and lured to his flat were not assaulted in any manner. Although he did attempt to strangle a 19-year-old student named Paul Nobbs on November 23, 1981, but stopped himself from completing the act. In March of 1982, Nilsen encountered 23-year-old John Hallett while drinking in a pub near Leicester Square. Hallett was lured to Nilsen's flat on the promise of continued drinking with Nilsen. 1 hour later, Nilsen unsuccessfully attempted to ruse Hallett, then sat on the edge of the bed drinking rum as he stared at Hallett before deciding to kill him. Following a ferocious struggle in which Hallett himself attempted to strangle his attacker, Nilsen strangled Hallett into unconsciousness with an upholstery strap before returning to his living room, shaking from the stress of the struggle in which he had believed he would be overpowered. On 3 occasions over the following 10 minutes, Nilsen unsuccessfully attempted to kill his victim after noting he had resumed breathing before deciding to fill his bathtub with water and drown him. For over a week following Hallett's murder, Nilsen's own neck bore the victim's finger impressions.
In May 1982, Nilsen encountered Carl Stottor, a 21-year-old gay man, as the young man drank at the Black Cap pub in Camden. This man is all about drinking and luring man. Nilsen engaged Stottor in a conversation, discovering he was depressed following a failed relationship. After plying him with alcohol, Nilsen invited him to his flat, assuring his guests he had no intention of sexual activity. At the flat, this person consumed further alcohol before falling asleep upon an open sleeping bag. He later awoke to find himself being strangled by Nilsen, loudly whispering, "Stay still." In his subsequent testimony in Nilsen's trial, Stottor stated he initially believed Nilsen was trying to free him from the zip of the sleeping bag before he returned to a state of unconsciousness. He then vaguely recalled hearing water running before realizing he was immersed in the water and Nilsen was attempting to drown him. After briefly succeeding in raising his head above the water, Stottor gasped, "No more, please, no more," before Nilsen again submerged Stottor's head beneath the water. Believing he had been killed, Nilsen seated him in his armchair, then noted his mongrel dog, Bleep, licking Stottor's face. Nilsen realized he was still alive, barely alive. He rubbed Stottor's limbs and heart to increase circulation, covered his body in blankets, then laid him upon his bed. When Stottor regained consciousness, Nilsen embraced him. He then explained to Stottor he had almost strangled himself on a zip of the sleeping bag, and he was trying to resuscitate him.
Over the following 2 days, Stottor repeatedly lapsed in and out of consciousness. When Stoddard had regained enough strength to question Nilsen as to his recollections of being strangled and immersed in cold water, Nilsen explained he had become caught in the zip of a sleeping bag following a nightmare, and that he had placed him in cold water as you were in shock. Nilsen then led Stoddard to a nearby railway station where he informed the young man he hoped that they meet again before he bade him farewell. 3 months after Nilsen's June 1982 promotion to the position of executive officer of his employment, he encountered a 27-year-old named Graham Allen attempting to hail a taxi in Shaftesbury Avenue. Allen accepted Nilsen's offer to accompany him to Cranley Gardens for a meal, as he had been the case with several previous victims. Nilsen stated he cannot recall the precise moment he had strangled Allen, but recalled approaching him as he sat eating an omelet with the full intention of murdering him. Allen's body was retained in the bathtub for a total of 3 days before Nilsen began the task of dissecting the body upon the kitchen floor. Nilsen is again known to have informed his employers he was ill and unable to attend work on October 9, 1982, in order that he could complete the dissection of Allen's body.
Because that's what you do. You just eat and then you dissect. But on January 26, 1983, Nilsen killed his final victim, which was a 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair. Sinclair was last seen by his acquaintances in the company of Nilsen walking in the direction of the tube station. At Nilsen's flat, Sinclair fell asleep in a drug and alcohol-induced state in an armchair as Nilsen sat listening to rock opera Tommy. Nilsen approached Sinclair, knelt before him, and said to himself, "Oh, Stephen, here I go again," before strangling Sinclair with a ligature constructed with a necktie and a rope. Noting crepe bandages upon each of Sinclair's wrists, Nilsen removed these to discover several deep slash marks from where Sinclair had recently tried to kill himself. Following his unusual ritual of bathing the body, Nilsen laid Sinclair's body upon his bed, applied talcum powder on his body, then arranged 3 mirrors around the bed before himself, laying naked alongside the dead man. Several hours later, he turned Stephen's head towards him before kissing his body on the forehead and saying, "Good night, Stephen." Nilsen then fell asleep alongside the body, because that's what you do again. As had been in the case with both Howlett and Allen, Sinclair's body was subsequently dissected, with various dismembered parts wrapped in plastic bags and stored in either a wardrobe, a tea chest, or within a drawer located beneath the bathtub. The bags used to hold Sinclair's remains were sealed with the same crepe bandages Nilsen had found upon Sinclair's wrists. Nilsen attempted to dispose of the flesh, internal organs, and small bones of all 3 victims killed at Cranley Gardens by flushing their dissected remains down his toilet. In a practice which he had conducted upon several victims killed at Melrose Avenue, he had boiled the heads, hands, and feet to remove the flesh off of these sections of victims' body. On February 4th, 1983, Nilsen wrote a letter of complaint to the estate agents, complaining that the drains of Cranley Gardens were blocked and that the situation for both himself and other tenants of the property was intolerable. Look at that. The following day, he refused to allow an acquaintance to enter his property, the reason being he had begun to dismember Sinclair's body on the floor of the kitchen. Right.
Nilsen's murders were first discovered by a Dino Rod employee, Michael Catran, who responded to the plumbing complaints made by both Nilsen and other tenants of Cranley Gardens on February 8, 1983. Opening a drain cover at the side of the house, Catran discovered the drain was packed with a flesh-like substance and numerous small bones of unknown origin. Catran reported his suspicions to his supervisor, Gary Wheeler. As Catran had arrived at the property at dusk, he and Wheeler agreed to postpone further investigation into the blockage until the following morning. Prior to leaving the property, Nilsen and the fellow tenant, Jim Alcock, convened with Catran to discuss the source of the substance. Upon hearing Catran explain how similar the substance was to appearance to human flesh, Nilsen replied, "It looks to me like someone has been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken."
Normal, right?
At 7:30 a.m. the following day, Catran and Wheeler returned to Cranley Gardens, by which time the drain had been cleared. This aroused the suspicions of both men. Catran discovered some scraps of flesh and 4 bones in the pipe leading from the drain, which linked to the top of the flat to the house. To both Catran and Wheeler, the bones looked as if they originated from a human hand. Both men immediately called the police, who, upon closer inspection, discovered further small bones and scraps of what looked like, to the naked eye, either human or animal flesh in the same pipe. These remains were taken to the mortuary at Hornsey, where pathologist David Bowen advised police that the remains were human and that one particular piece of flesh, he concluded, had been from a human neck bone, bore a ligature mark.
Upon learning from fellow tenants that the top floor flat where the human remains had been flushed belonged to Nilsen, Detective Chief Inspector Peter J. and 2 colleagues opted to wait outside the house until Nilsen returned home from work. When Nilsen arrived, he introduced himself and his colleagues, explaining that they had come to inquire about the blockage at the drain from the drain of his flat. Nilsen asked why the police were interested in his drain and also whether or not the 2 officers present with Jay were health inspectors. In response, Jay informed Nilsen that the other 2 were also police officers and requested access to his flat to discuss the matter further. The 3 officers followed Nilsen into his flat, where they immediately noted the odor of rotted flesh. Nilsen was questioned further as to why the police were interested in his drains, to which he was informed that the blockage had been caused by human remains. Nilsen was in shock and disbelief, right? Saying, "Good grief, how awful." In response, Jay replied, "Don't mess about. Where's the rest of the body?" Nilsen responded calmly, admitted that the remain of the body could be found in 2 plastic bags in a nearby wardrobe, to which the inspector and his colleagues noted the overpowering smell of decomposition emanated. The officers did not open the cupboard, but asked Nilsen whether there were other body parts to be found, to which he replied, "It's a long story. It goes back a long time. I'll tell you everything. I want to get it off my chest. Not here at the police station." Insane.
And despite attempts by Nilsen's defense to undermine the testimony of these victims by introducing evidence of their sexual encounters with Nilsen, their harrowing accounts inflicted serious damage on the defense's case. Physical evidence included photographs of the murder scene, as well as the chopping board used to dissect the victims and the cooking pot used to boil the skulls, feet, and hands, which is now on display at the Black Museum of Scotland Yard. The defense case relied primarily on the testimony of 2 psychiatrists, Dr. James McKeith and Dr. Patrick Galway. McKeith described Nilsen's troubled childhood, inability to express feelings, and the resulting separation of mental function from physical behavior, which affected his own sense of identity and implied an impaired responsibility on the part of Nilsen. Under intense cross-examination by the prosecution, however, McKeith was forced to retract his judgment about diminished responsibility. And during the summing up, the judge dispensed with the majority of the psychiatric jargon that had perplexed the jury by instructing them that a mind can be evil without being abnormal. The jury retired on November 3rd, 1983, but were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The following day, the judge agreed to accept a majority verdict, and at 4:25 p.m., they delivered a verdict of guilty on all 6 counts of murder. The judge sentenced Dennis Nilsen to life in prison without eligibility for parole for at least 25 years. And Nilsen died in prison in 2018.
Oh, go figure. So this was a story. This story was given to me. I had no idea about this particular psychopath. A friend of mine from England, her name is Raluca, shout out to her. She gave me the story, and in the beginning I was like, no, it felt like it was another Jeffrey Dahmer. The only problem is he committed all this way before Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right.
But the stories of their lives are very similar.
Correct.
Like their childhood is very similar. Their military service is similar. The fact that they were gay and closeted in the beginning, but this particular one, I didn't know, but she pointed out they made a docuseries on it. The docuseries name, if you want to check it out, it's called Des. It is with David Tennant and Jason Watkins. It came out in 2020. It's on, I think it's rolling on AMC streaming. But it was, when I read all this, it was shocking.
Right.
Who wakes up and okay, let's say you murder someone, but who puts them on a chair to kiss and to lay down and watch TV? Because
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right. Like you sit there.
Show business.
It's your business, right? I think it's like that's the shocking part. Every time we play one story that's like of this nature,
right?
And this guy was pretty big. It's just like it's shocking that they have the the emotional part to literally go about their business.
Right. I know. Yeah, I mean, I think I recall this story because I remember somebody putting body parts down a drain, unless that was just another story that happened here in the United States.
Right.
But I do remember where somebody got caught because there were body parts that were clogging the drain. I know there is another story where the woman was putting into the garbage disposal, like chopping up most of the body. So yeah,
it happens.
I don't know. I think it's I think people think that they could just easily dispose. I guess if you cut them up in tiny little pieces, you might be able to flush them down the toilet.
But in this
they would have to be really chopped, and it would take you a long period of time.
But that's the shocking part.
I would think
the smell.
The smell, yeah, the body rotting.
And the other shocking part was he would have never been caught had he still been living at his previous residence.
True.
Because there he had a place where like the backyard where he could burn them.
Right.
But here he didn't have that luxury.
No, so he had no choice. He had to get rid of the bodies by throwing them down the drain.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's what normal people do. Like you just take them down the drain when you're pissed with them.
So next time somebody asks you to go for like drinks at their house or dinner, I think I'm going to decline, especially with this one. Come over.
Yeah, let's dispose of your body down the drain.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. The weird part is in the United States, to be fair, you can't do that. You will clog it with the tiniest piece of flesh.
Yeah, probably so. Probably so.
Like maybe in Britain the pipes are different, but here it wouldn't go. So
right. But, so it just begs to reason that never trust anybody. Be careful who you pick up. Be careful who you accept a dinner invitation or drink invitation from, and going out to the bars. And just remember.
Right. It's pretty crazy if you look at the outside world. And this happened in the 80s. So.
In the 80s. And now it's even worse because the internet and the anonymity.
Right.
People hide behind that, thinking they're not going to get caught.
Right.
Alrighty, guys. It was a long one. I hope you survived. Hope you made it to the end. And always remember, the truth is always scarier. Until the next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.